Chapter 11. Imogen felt awkward after the encounter, reliving it over in her mind as she returned to her car. Trying to talk to the other woman was like talking to a wall. There was no emotion or reciprocation to work with. Normally, Imogen didn't have a problem speaking to others. In fact, she was quite good at it. Apparently, she'd met her match in Anita. Imogen started her car, driving slowly down the driveway back to her aunt's. Before she could reach the small bridge, however, Gabe's truck pulled in and blocked her way on the single-lane drive. She debated backing up, but was incredibly aware of Anita still standing on the porch within view. The bridge before her and the stone gates were shrouded in thick trees, offering a little privacy. Maybe it was best to leave her car here. She put the car in park and got out of the vehicle, leaving it running. Best rip the Band-Aid off, she thought, and started walking hesitantly toward Gabe's truck. She watched Gabe unravel his lanky form from the driver's seat to meet her. His booted feet made a crunching noise on the gravel as he met her halfway, so they both stood atop the bridge, the creek burbling underneath them. It might have been romantic, if she wasn't so nervous. Her palms were sweating again, and her heart was in her throat. He looked good, she thought, as her gaze traveled up his strong, leanly muscled body, until she saw his face. His blue eyes were dark, circles apparent like he hadn't been sleeping well, and he'd left his beard to grow. She didn't typically like facial hair, but it suited him. His eyes were wary as they settled on hers. He looked like he'd been through the ringer, and she frowned. "I would ask how you are, but you look terrible." Gabe let out a shocked laugh before he covered it up with a cough. In truth, it had been a tough few days with her gone. His nightmares had become relentless, forcing him to toss and turn before eventually giving up and starting the day early. He'd been lucky to sleep 4 or 5 hours a night. It was becoming more and more difficult to concentrate at work. Gabe looked forward to seeing Imogen and relaxing in her company, giving him some solace, and her distance the last few days had weighed on him. He didn't know what else to do. He was in a tough situation, torn between keeping Lopez's secret and explaining her appearance to Imogen. How could he explain it without being completely honest? It was better to say nothing. "I've been better." It was clearly an understatement, but Imogen couldn't laugh. His hair was unkempt and he was paler than usual. Despite that, Imogen drank him in. No matter how haggard his appearance, she'd missed him terribly. Skipping their Sunday horsemanship and brunch date had made this the longest they'd gone without seeing or speaking to each other. She hated it. If that meant respecting his reasons for keeping Anita's counsel, then maybe she should just trust him. "Yeah, me too." Imogen sighed. She rubbed her face and jumped in with both feet. "Listen, I'm sorry for how I acted the other day when you came to apologize." There, that wasn't so hard to admit. Just straight and to the point, Imogen said to herself. Gabe watched her carefully. "It's okay, I understand." She rolled her eyes. He wasn't normally very talkative, but this was like pulling teeth. "I get that the situation last week wasn't ideal and my being there complicated things." When he didn't disagree, she kept going. "I trust you, and know there are things you can't or won't tell me. I'm sorry that I got mad at you the first time that was tested." He searched her eyes, trying to read her face. What he saw there must have convinced him her words were true, because he gave a little smile. It was tiny, but she saw the quirk of his lip. Encouraged, she kept going. In for a penny, in for a pound. "So, I was wondering, I know you have a lot on your plate with your guest, but if there is anything I can do to help the situation, I'll do it." He shook his head. "I can't talk about it. I promised Lopez." He was such a loyal friend. Despite her burning curiosity, she loved him more for it. "No, I don't need to know the details. That's her business." She sighed, wanting to know, but she wouldn't force anyone to share secrets. That wouldn't be fair. "I'm sorry I can't tell you, Jersey. I asked her, but she would rather I didn't for now, and it's not my place." The past few days had been difficult. He wasn't used to having company, and Lopez was either huddled on the couch staring at the walls or pacing the guest room. The tension of having to host someone after years of blessed solitude was causing him to crack under the strain. He hated it. Imogen nodded, accepting his words at their face. I get it, even though it stinks. Let me take something off your plate. The horses, perhaps? I can take over the feeding and mucking for a few days to let you rest a bit. Imogen closed the distance between them slowly while she spoke. When she reached him, she put out her hand tentatively. When he met her halfway, engulfing her small hand in his own, she closed her eyes briefly in relief. He caressed it absently with his thumb. Jersey. He sighed deeply. I'm glad you came. I missed you. I missed you too, she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. He tugged her hand, pulling her in for a tight, full-body hug. She breathed in the unique smell of him, pine needles and horses, letting it calm her nerves. This was the most relaxed she'd felt in days. After a few minutes of cuddling, wow, it was nice when he rubbed her back, she looked up at him, resting her chin on his chest. His eyes had crinkled around the corners a little, like they usually did when he looked down at her. Thank goodness, her Gabe was peeking through. If there's one thing I've learned since moving to Vermont, it's that there is nothing wrong with asking for help. Oh, you've learned that, have you? Gabe's dimples were now starting to peek out. Crisis averted. She'd missed the sight of them so much. She nodded, looking up at him, her chin resting on his chest. Yep, that's what happens when people love you. They want to help. So let me help you and Anita in any way that I can, even if it's just tangential. She was so precious, Gabe thought. He'd spent the last several years alone, with the weight of the world on him as he attempted to be a brother and father figure to his sister, pay off his veterinary school loans, and start a successful practice. All this while battling the PTSD from his time in the military. Truthfully, he'd struggled a lot of the time in silence. It wasn't fair, he thought, to trauma dump to his friends. Now, here was his gorgeous, empathetic girlfriend offering to support him in whatever way he needed. She never even blinked that there was a strange woman staying in his house. She was probably more upset because he didn't include her. Of course, he could forgive her initial reaction. If he was honest with himself, Gabe didn't think he could have gone another few days without seeing her. Imogen was his touchstone. He gave her some space at first because she needed it, then second-guessed whether he should push her. If she hadn't shown up today, he would have showered and then gone to her. I love you, he admitted. It was easier every time he said it aloud. Still, the words didn't feel like they were enough to describe just how he felt about her. The distance between them had cut him deep. I would love your help with the horses, and anything else. I need you more than I realized. Her smile at his words lit him up inside. How about this? Go home and get cleaned up. I'll take you out to dinner. We can spend some time together, just the two of us. She loved that idea, with one caveat. I guess we can't exactly stay at home. Between your guest and my aunt, we're lacking for privacy. She winked, and he grinned, his dimples fully out to play. While he would have loved to stay home and be alone, quality alone time would have to wait until Lopez left. Still, it was a great impetus to find a solution quickly. He needed to be with his redhead. I promise, I'll owe you a romantic dinner. Lopez should be leaving very soon. She said it'd only be a few days. Imogen reached up to cup his cheeks, the hair tickling her fingers. She liked it. The scruff made him look a little rough. Maybe leave the beard, though. His unexpected laugh had her lighting up inside. They would be okay, Imogen thought. She was willing to bet on them every time. It was hard to let him go, but eventually they had to separate, with the promise that he'd pick her up in an hour for their date. She couldn't wait.